Now we go into the next segment of our podcast, and we welcome Kevin Norbury to talk about his piece, Gaudete. Firstly, welcome to the podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and thank you ever so much for giving up your time to join us today. Today we're going to be looking at your composition, Gaudete, a firm favourite of any band, especially at Christmas. First of all, would you be able to tell us a little about the background of how you came to writing this piece?
At the time, I wanted to write something a little bit different from just a straight carol arrangement. So I decided that I would choose 3 medieval carols and put them into a sort of mini Christmas overture, if you like, for brass band. I'm particularly fond of carols from the medieval and Renaissance periods in European history. I just love the sound of them. Their melodies have something about them which make them eminently singable and also very memorable. And they were 3 of my favorites. I did also consider In Dulce Jubilo, but that had been done so many times by so many people that I decided to leave that one out and stick to these 3. So that basically was the reason for it. There may have been another reason, I don't know. I know the ISB played it at the annual big Salvation Army Christmas festival that was used to be held in London. I don't know. I can't remember now whether I was asked to write for that or anything, but it was done sort of, I think, middle of the year-ish in 1997.
So the 3 medieval carols that you mentioned featured our Coventry carol, Unto Us a Boy is Born, and of course the title track, Gaudete. What was the inspiration between using these particular carols?
Well, the Coventry carol, being a sort of 16th century English carol, seemed the ideal one to begin with. The slowest of the 3, and also of course it's a carol that, if you follow the words of the verses, tells the whole story and focuses on the massacre of the innocents as it's told in Matthew 2. The other 2 were firm favorites of me. I'd always loved Puer Nobis, Unto Us a Boy is Born. Very simple tune, scalic, again got lovely shape to the melody. And then Gaudete, which is very rhythmic, actually, with the changing meters. And of course, there was what was it, Steel Eye Span did a recording of it, a very folky type recording, and it was very popular at the time. And that sort of, again, influenced me because I knew it wasn't in the Salvation Army carol repertoire at that time. So, but it was popular outside. So that was really the rationale between choosing those 3. So,
and of course, the medieval carols have a really distinctive sound world with these sort of modal harmony they use. Have you deliberately tried to treat these carols in a similar modal way, or have you juxtaposed the medieval sound with a modern sound that the brass band gives?
I think the latter. I think I have tried to sort of juxtapose those 2 styles. I mean, the brass band sound I do think is ideally suited to these type of modal harmonies, and certainly the type of melodies as they exist in this. I've tried to consciously avoid raised sevenths and things like that. I've also tried to use a feature of Renaissance music, false relation between parts, whereby you get a sort of major minor effect similar to the modern major minor jazz chords, where you've got to say a G natural in one part against a G sharp in another register in another part, so you get that sort of zing between the 2 notes.
And other than the medieval influences, are there any other influences we can hear in the piece as a whole?
I would say that halfway through, where we go into Puer Nobis, with the full band, not just the cornet. So we're talking about measure 155. That is a conscious nod towards Peter Warlock's Capriole Suite, the sword dance from the Capriole Suite.
Great. And thank you for that context into work. We'll now look at it in a little bit more detail at the music and follow the score. Those that are listening at home may find it useful to also follow a score, which of course are available on the Salvation Army Music Index. So could you talk us through the opening, first of all, and what sort of atmosphere you're trying to create in the introduction up to roughly figure 12?
Okay, well, the sort of the percussion start sort of introducing the two styles, really. I mean, the element of mystery at the beginning, and then the sort of more rhythmic style with the snare drum entry in the end of the first bar and the second bar. I'm trying to create an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation here. This is sort of, if you like, Advent in 12 bars. The actual opening motif in the trombone is based on the opening of Coventry Carol. And if you look at the 2 beats before measure 12, I'm going to use the proper terminology, on the minim chord. It's so nice to be able to say that rather than half note and quarter note. And the quavers in the cornet part, you've got the G natural in the solo cornet part and the G sharp lower down in the band. Gives it that sort of, I don't know, that sort of Tudor choral feel at that point. But again, it's sort of slightly hinting towards modern as well, because of course major minor chords are very much a part of the jazz vernacular.
So moving on to figure 12, the music suddenly picks up tempo and we hear some more strands of the Coventry Carol. What was your thought process behind using the slightly unusual 5/4 time signature here?
To be different, basically. It just seemed to work very well in that time signature. And of course, I think, most composers at one time or another have been influenced by that iconic Dave Brubeck figure from Take 5. And I don't know, perhaps that had something to do with it. I really don't know. I just wanted it to be different, but with that medieval feel still to it.
Absolutely. And is there anything else that we should be looking out for, listening out for during this section up to figure 56?
I guess the percussion ostinato that keeps going through a lot of this. The quaver figures are sort of based on, again, the main melodic idea. So I suppose the time change at 31, where the style sort of changes more to a sort of, I suppose you'd say, a sort of march style, but it's not really a march style, but it's rhythmic, and there's a sort of certain vigor and energy to it at that point.
And just looking at that bar before 56, we have this ad-lib flugel solo, which sounds quite jazzy. Again, is this an intentional juxtaposition between the jazz idiom and the medieval?
Yes, it was. It was, I mean, I'll be completely honest, I was writing this with the ISB in mind. And at that time, the flugel player was Robert Foster. And Bob was a good jazz player. I mean, Himes' solo, So Glad, Bob Foster really made that his own. He could play it in a very idiomatic style. And I just thought, well, that's a bit of a sort of cheeky look to the future at that point, with him in mind.
So when we get to 56, the music enters another distinct section, led by the snare drum, playing this repeated ostinato figure. Could you talk us through the inspiration for this section?
Well, you may have heard of a musical show called Riverdance. And yes, the percussion part is definitely a nod to Riverdance at that point.
You said that you had the ISB in mind when writing this piece. Did you have any particular members of the ISB that you could imagine river dancing along to this part?
No, there was no one elegant enough in the ISB at that time, or energetic enough to certainly do that type of Irish dancing. Except perhaps a very young Andrew Blythe.
That sounds like something I think a lot of people would pay to see a dance.
Oh, I'm sure they would, yes. And of course, in those days, you see, David Dawes was a young one as well. I would have paid money to see David Riverdance, I think, while playing his cornet. Yes.
That's our future episode sorted. So let's head back to the music now. At figure 80, tempo marking is Con Fuoco with fire. And perhaps this being our Christmas episode, we could get some chestnuts roasting on that fire there. So talking about roasts, the soprano, solo cornet, baritone and euphonium parts are quite challenging here with these semi-quaver passages. Could you talk us through what happens musically in this section?
So I was going to say basically nothing, it's just a repeat. And then I noticed that I interject fragments of Gaudete. I've got 3 bars of semi-quavers and then 2 bars of Gaudete in the trombones. Then another 3 bars of dance material. Then another reference to Gaudete. And then the dance material carries on. And as is my wont, it tends to get quicker and leads us into the actual tune at 96, again with a very prominent percussion figure going on underneath.
Now let's look at figure 96, where we have the tune Gaudete appearing in full. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the melody and the way you've treated it in this section.
Well, the melody itself is from a collection of medieval and Renaissance Finnish and Swedish tunes called P.A. Cantiones. It was published in the early 1580s and became popular, especially in Germany and in the what we think of as the Netherlands. And those tunes became very well known. The actual word Gaudete means rejoice, and the words of the refrain are rejoice, rejoice, Christ is born of the Virgin Mary, rejoice. Now that's quite interesting because it was a Renaissance tune, and of course Renaissance saw the Reformation during that period, and this still has remnants of the Catholic veneration of the Virgin Mary in it, this particular carol. It wasn't removed at all. Because they tended to get rid of any Catholic references in these medieval song collections. So it's a very joyous carol indeed. And I can hear it being played. In fact, I've got a couple of medieval arrangements on CD with those Renaissance drums and shawms and rackets and all those wonderful wind instruments from that period.
Absolutely, a really truly unique sound, and something I wish we could hear more of, perhaps today.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Now, jumping forwards a little bit to bar 158, we change into the key of concert E major, and we see the inclusion of the third carol, Unto Us a Boy is Born. Now, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but could you talk us through what your ideas were with this section?
Well, first of all, I thought long and hard about that key shift. And then I thought, bass trombone players aren't used to seeing 4 sharps. And I thought, well, no, I'm not going to change the key just because it's an inconvenience. So I stuck to that key. But it sits very nicely in that key, I think. And just a simple sort of intervallic treatment of the melody at 148, where I've just got open sixths, fifths, and thirds, gives it that sort of, if you like, that sort of classical horn, the spacing of the chords in the horn writing in classical and early romantic style. But I wanted the ostinato figure to continue. I like ostinatos. I've used them a lot, and I thought an ostinato was a memorable figure through here. So basically, it was just the timp solo at that point, which was the ostinato. But then the ostinato turned into sort of grinding fifths at the bass, boom, 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 which is, as I said earlier, I think a nod to Peter Warlock with the Caprio Suite.
As a composer, when you're writing music, does making it playable and idiomatic for the instruments you're writing for play on your mind much?
There are certain keys that sound better in the brass band, I think. That's something that plays on your mind, the intonation. Also, a thing I've learned as I've written through the years is there's no virtue in just making it awkward for the sake of it being awkward. I think there's a tendency when you start out to write, you want to try and make it as different and, I don't know, as sort of, you want to try and inject some sort of level of difficulty into the music you're writing. When I was first moved out to the US, I went to hear a recital of modern orchestral music, which were the results of doctoral examinations in music at Princeton. And there were 6 pieces performed, and every one of them had every piece of percussion imaginable in them, every possible tone color imaginable. By the end of the third piece, you were just overwhelmed with just so many sonic effects rather than actual good musical material. And if anything, I would say to younger composers, don't try to be as different as you can straight away. Don't use sonic effects just purely for effects. Use them when the music demands it. And I think I was also, because I had a certain band in mind, I'm also guilty of trying to make it a little bit difficult as well.
Very wise advice indeed. At bar 179, we have some antiphonal call and response figures between the cornets and the trombones before the character of the music changes once again at 187, marked Giocoso, lively and joyful. Could you tell us what happens through the music here?
Well, basically, I've broken the melody of Gaudete up into different registers, different tone colors, cornets first, then trombones, then tubas. And then at 187, I switch gear again and sort of introduce changing meters briefly before landing on a nice comfortable 2/4 meter at 192.
And at 227, the music becomes much more chromatic from what we've seen before. And we see some really quite quick tonal progressions accompanied by an accelerando in the music that takes us through to 241. Is there anything in particular that we should be looking for and listening out for in this section?
Well, I love the effect of a 4/2 chord resolving onto a 6 chord. I've heard it used wonderfully in, I can't remember which piece it is by RSA, but I thought it was such a striking effect that I actually used that as a modulatory passage through here. 227 to 233 is basically successive 4/2 chords going to 6 chords, moving down chromatically. And then, of course, we arrive at 233, where we're in concert. What are we in? Concert C major at that point, and we arrive on that second inversion chord at the beginning of 233, which is always a bright sounding chord, I think.
I don't think there's any other word to describe it other than scintillating, this finish from 241 to the end. It's a real tour de force for any band to play. Would you be able to talk us through this exciting final section?
Yes, again, I'm getting quicker and quicker. As my wife tells me, I do that in every piece I write. I just think this whole section as a sort of coda section. It's a decorated version of a melody that I use. I've got that syncopated idea through there. Again, there's sort of brief mention of an ostinato at 248 in the basses and bass trombone. It's sort of music of a closing nature. That's all really it is. I remember going to work one day, coming into Waterloo and thinking, I know that. And then realized they were actually playing Gaudete at Waterloo Station.
Wow.
And I thought, whoopee, royalties. And I think I probably saw about 25 pence for that. But even so, to have it played at Waterloo Station was a privilege, and one I count myself lucky to have heard, because I wouldn't have believed anybody if they'd have told me.
Did you ask all the commuters if they could keep it down a little bit, just so you could hear it a bit better?
No, I actually hurried onto the escalator and got out as quick as I could.
Would you say the piece was written with the acoustics of Waterloo Station in mind? Or?
Yes, you could get away with a lot in the acoustics of Waterloo Station, so that might be ideal for certain bands. But no, definitely not.
And my final question would be, obviously you've heard lots of different performances and recordings of this piece, but could you pick a favourite?
Can I say, I have obviously not heard of many recordings or performances of the piece. I've played a couple myself. When I was in Entrada Brass, we played it. I've heard it live twice, I think, and that was it. And I've only got one recording of it, and that's the recording the ISB made.